sum up everything you know about resistance training into a short template for me now, for trainers to use, what would that look like? And I'm just talking back to basics: volume, frequency, effort, number of exercises in the session. At its most basic, what would that look like for you now?
Yeah, okay. So that's an interesting question, because you framed it in the sense of, like, from the perspective of what a trainer might use. And I like to come back to this idea that the baseline approach, the template that you should use, should be the most simple one. And then you can self-experiment on yourself or with your clients around that to find what tweak and what works best. And what works best, I'm not talking about in the sense of like what will produce the greatest strength for improvements or muscle mass increase or whatever, but what fits that person and their individual needs, their context, in order to be able to deliver the stimulus that you're interested in. So I think you can strip it back down to basics in the sense that we know that once a week is sufficient. Twice a week is similar. 3 times a week is similar. So of those choices, once a week is a good starting point. Personally, I would opt for potentially, if you were working with a client, twice a week. And the reason I say that is more of a practical element, because doing it once a week means that it's far easier from experience for people to miss one session and then miss another, and then there's a very long period of detraining that occurs, and sometimes they just fall off the wagon and don't come back. Twice a week keeps them a bit more regular. They can miss one and still get one in that session. So there's an element of the evidence and practicalities around that recommendation. When it comes to those actual sessions, in terms of the exercise selection and volume, we know that for the vast majority of exercises, isolation and multi-joint, single joint and multi-joint exercises produce very similar stimulus. There may be specific instances where certain muscles may need specific stimulation from isolation work. But as a basic kind of template, I would start with a core set of multi-joint movements that address the main musculature of the body. So an upper body push, an upper body pull, some sort of compound lower body exercise, and maybe a kind of trunk extension based exercise as well. So I would start with that. In terms of the volume of those exercises, there is plenty of research showing that low volumes, single sets per exercise show similar improvements to multi-set approaches for a range of different outcomes. And even if some people would quibble that high volumes might be better for hypertrophy, for example, on the whole, you will get the most bang for your buck from a low volume of exercise. Now, when it comes to the actual performance of those exercises, as we said, the repetition duration becomes far less important. What's more important is the safety of the range of motion, again, fitting that to the individual, being aware of any kind of injuries, limitations that they might have anatomically or prior conditions or anything like that. But the key is really going to be to take them to a high enough intensity of effort. And in a practical sense, the easiest thing is to push them towards momentary failure. Now, they may or may not get there, and we don't really know whether you have to get there or whether there's a little threshold just before there that you can back up from. But the fact that we don't know that means that the safety net is just try and get there if you can. Now, we do know that training to failure doesn't produce any worse outcomes than not training to failure, so it's kind of a catch-all from that perspective. So it's very, very simple, low frequency, low volume, small selection of multi-joint exercises, performed using I would probably select a kind of repetition duration that allows a participant to basically perform the exercise in the form that you desire for them and you prescribe for them to follow. If they're going too quick and their form's becoming sloppy, slow it down a little bit. If they're going too slow and they're segmenting and they're doing all these kind of weird things because they're going too slow, speed it up a little bit. Find something that's smooth and works with them. It really makes a little difference. So that would be my kind of basic template with someone.
And have you got a sort of ballpark time under load that you think is likely?
Good question. I did miss that out. So again, this comes back down to the fact that actually There is little evidence that the time under load is important, and the reason we know that is because we know that heavy loads, which inherently produce a low time under load, and low loads, which produce a high time under load, produce very similar adaptations. The difference is in the acute experience of actually performing those loads and performing those time under loads. So on the whole, most people will find lower loads to produce higher levels of discomfort. So a high time under load is not particularly comfortable to actually perform. That's not to say you shouldn't use that with a client. This is where personal preference becomes a big factor in it. If you've got someone who dislikes the discomfort, then I would stick with a heavier load. Particularly if that discomfort is preventing them from pushing towards failure, because for a lot of people that will happen. So it comes down to personal preference. If it's that first session, I would just stick with a moderate load. Find the Goldilocks zone and then experiment from there. Find out if there's someone who likes, if they're a little bit masochistic and they like that kind of discomfort. You know, if they're a little bit weird like me and they're happy to do a kind of 4 or 5 minute wall sit and suffer through it. If they like that, then give them that. Then that's going to be absolutely fine. If they don't, then back them off, move them towards the heavier end of the spectrum and try and avoid that acute discomfort so that, you know, it doesn't potentially affect whether they want to come back to you.